यो ब्रह्माणं विदधाति पूर्वं यो वै वेदांश्च प्रहिणोति तस्मै तं हदेवम् आत्मबुद्धिप्रकाशं मुमुक्षुर्वै शरणमहं प्रपद्ये. We who seek liberation take refuge in that light which illumines the hearts of all beings, who is the source of the Creator himself, and who gave at the beginning of time the repository of all wisdom, the Veda, to the Creator himself. To that infinite luminous being, we offer our salutations and seek refuge. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So good morning to all. This morning I want to speak on what is the world, or what in the world is the world. What is all of this that we see? One of the things in spiritual life, a fundamental part of spiritual life, is learning to reinterpret our experience, not by making us believe things which shouldn't be believed, making us believe things which are untrue or which are just stories, made-up stories and so forth, but examining our experience of the world, the experience of self, the experience of God, all realms of experience, analyzing our experience and coming to a truer estimation of what it is that we're experiencing. What is this that we see? Who am I who sees? What is reality itself, known in theistic traditions as God? What is God? What is reality? So today I want to address the question, what is the world? And for most people, that's not a question at all. The world is taken for granted, where we see it. This is the world. What more explanation do you need? This is it. We deal with it every day. We live in the midst of it. We eat parts of it. We breathe parts of it. We love parts of it. We hate parts of it. We fight with parts of it. We help parts of it. And it's what we've known since we were first born. So again, we think that we know what the world is. It seems obvious. The world is given. And especially in Western thought, it was considered that the world was the one thing that should not be questioned. We can analyze it. We can try to figure out what it really is in depth. Yes, the Greeks began that process in the West, or it actually went on before even the Greeks, but the Greeks began the actual philosophical analysis of the world. So we can analyze it, but we can't question it. The fact that it is. The world is more important than I am. Because to think, according to traditional Western thought, starting with the Greeks, to think that my inquiry should begin with me, who am I, that's more important than what is the world, then that's absurd, because the world is vast and I'm just this little speck, insignificant speck within the world. And so again, we take the world for granted. We may not know who we are, and there's been surprisingly little thought given to that in the West, who we are. Some, yes. And certainly mystics, through their spiritual experience, had many things to say about the self. But the mystics in the West were usually, not always, but usually were put aside as some special category of great people once they were dead and dangerous people when they were alive. So their testimony was not that valuable. So again, the world seems to be taken for granted. We're born into the world, but what does the baby see when the baby looks at the world? What is the baby's experience of the world? Of course, it's hard to remember what that experience was. Maybe impossible to remember completely. So we have to sort of intuit what the baby's experience is, but we can get a good idea of it by doing that. And so the baby, when the baby opens its eyes and begins to see the world, it seems to be just a mass of oceanic sensations, as they're called. Oceanic because they're undifferentiated. Just a mass of sensations, colors and sounds and touches, tactile sensations, smells, tastes. The baby can't distinguish objects yet. The baby can't even distinguish its own body from the environment. And so there's just this mass of sensation. Gradually, the baby begins to pick out particular recurring forms within this ocean of sensations. One of the first is ma, ma, or in some languages, amma, or some form of that. Almost all languages have some form of mother where the word mother has ma in it. One of the first recurring forms the baby begins to recognize is that of the mother. And then da, ba, baba, dada, father. And from there it begins to discern other forms, and then the baby begins to discover its own body, starting with the hands, putting the hands in the mouth, and then discovering the foot and putting the foot in its mouth. Gradually discovers the limits of tactile sensation, which is the limits of the physical body, and begins to distinguish that from this, what is outside of the body. So the baby begins by just seeing this ocean of sensations, then it begins to recognize recurring forms, it begins to learn boundaries, and then it goes through a long process as it grows and develops and begins to capture language of recognizing names and forms. The mother driving the child through the countryside says, "Oh, look, cow, cow." And the baby says, "Cow, cow?" And the mother says, "Yes, cow, cow, cow." And then it drives a little further and there's a horse. And the baby says, "Cow, cow." Mother said, "No, no, that's horsey, that's horsey." "Horsey, horsey, horsey, yes, horsey." And so with dog and cat, and brother and sister, and so forth, the baby begins to recognize different forms. And so that education continues until we die. We're still learning names all along, even in old age. We're learning names for things, having new experiences, learning about things. Recently I had my first ever surgery and second ever stay in a hospital. The first day was in India for a fever and also a head injury, but two concurrent stays. But recently, first surgery, and so many new things I learned, all sorts of new experiences. Not the sort of experiences you ask for, but suddenly they're given to you and you have to learn them. So we learn until we die, and death itself, how much we learn at the time of death. Most people don't return from death to tell us what they learned, but we know that at the time of death that we learned so much also. So again, the world seems to be given. We go on learning about it, but the fact of the world is given. The fact of the world is given. Modern science, well no, let me start with religion. Most religions themselves start with accepting the existence of the world. So the world is here. We're born into it. The world exists. We are temporary residents in this world. We come and we go. But where did the world come from? That's one of the original religious questions. Where did all of this come from? And the answer of most religions is God. Some religions, like Buddhism, and the non-dualistic aspect of Vedanta, most Vedantins believe in God, but the non-dualistic aspect of Vedanta and Buddhism say that the universe has come out of ignorance. It's ignorance that's produced the world. They have a much more elaborate philosophical answer for that, but the basic answer is that we see the world because of ignorance. But for most people in the world, and most religious traditions, the answer is that God or the gods, a single deity or multiple deities, are the source of this universe. One of the old arguments, it's modern as far as, if you think of modern times going back to the Renaissance, it's a modern analogy, but a modern argument for the existence of God is that if you were wandering in a desert with no signs of human impact whatsoever, a wild and untamed desert, and there in the desert you found a wristwatch, functioning wristwatch, then you would think someone has made this. This it wasn't just sand blowing together and rocks colliding with each other and suddenly a watch has been produced. No, the watch has come from some intelligence. It had to be made. And so this universe in its infinite complexity, it must have come from intelligence. And so the universe must have been created. And so the idea of God. So religion begins with most religion begins, in fact, probably all religion begins. Even the Buddha began with the acceptance of the world. And Vedanta began with the acceptance of the world, and the Vedas. So it begins with the recognition that the world is here. We're born into it, we die from it, but the world continues. Then we come to the development of modern science. Science began with accepting the world, but science was not satisfied with saying, well, God created it, so if you want to know about the world, go to the Bible, or go to the Quran, or go to some other script, go to the Veda, go to some scripture, and everything that you need to know about the world is contained there. No, science was not satisfied with that. Science wanted to know, what is this? And science, one of the revolutionary aspects of science was, science wanted to know, what is this in its own terms? Not who made it, who created it, and what did they create it out of? Was it creation out of nothing, ex nihilo creation, or was it creation out of some primordial substance, or what was it? But what is this in its own terms? I don't need to refer to a deity. I don't need to refer to God in order to understand the desk in the scientific thinking. So what is this? What is stone in its own terms? Let me analyze stone and find out what it is. That was a revolutionary way of thinking. You see the roots of it in ancient Greek thinking, and in other cultures as well. They were the roots of scientific thinking. It's not that science did something completely new, but it was a radical departure, taking up an old theme and pursuing it radically. That was the beginnings of modern science. What are the heavens in themselves? What is it that makes the planets move? What is it that makes the stars move? What is it that makes the sun move around the earth as it appeared in the beginning? What is the path of the sun around the earth? What are the mathematics involved? And so the beginning of the examination of the world in its own terms began with modern science. Again, I'll come back in a moment to a religious examination of the world in its own terms, but right now let me pursue the scientific for a moment. A strange thing began to happen. As science began to do that, first it was taking the world and our experience of the world for granted. And yes, obviously the sun rises, the sun sets. We don't move, we're right here. And the sun rises in the east, it crosses the sky, and it goes down and so forth. The heavens move around the earth, everything is moving around the earth, but this is stable. But soon they found that no, that doesn't really work. The Ptolemaic astronomy, which assumed that the earth was at the center of the universe and everything moved around the earth, that was extraordinarily complex. Yes, you can look at the earth that way, you can make everything move around the earth, but it's extraordinarily complex, and that led to one of the basic principles of modern science, and that was the search for simplicity, the search for the simple explanation. Because beginning with Galileo and then through Kepler and Copernicus, etc., they began to understand more of the heavenly motions, and Copernicus came up with the heliocentric universe, that everything moves around the sun. And And suddenly the movements of the heavens were easily explicable. They were understandable. A mathematical model was greatly simplified. Ptolemaic astronomy was extraordinarily complex to predict the motions of the heavens and so forth. But suddenly when you have the sun stationary and the Earth and other planets moving around the sun, and the sun moving on its axis, then the motions were easy to understand, easy to predict. The mathematics was simple. And so again, you get that principle of the simplicity of explanation is what is desired in science. And so we go from that to more radical departures. You find the Newtonian laws of motion and thermodynamics, etc. You come to Darwin's theory of evolution, and the idea that life is a continuum, that there's the beginning of simple life and then the development of more and more complex life up through human life, the most complex form that we know at present. So this idea that life is a continuum. Again, trying to understand life in its own terms, not in terms of a creator who created life and why did God create it and what is God's purpose. Those are religious questions, but trying to understand life in its own terms. And so science developed. And then in the late 19th century and continuing with great rapidity in the first half of the 20th century, the extraordinary developments of physics. You look at a table like this, you look at anything, you look at stone. Let's take something that's simpler and more basic, like stone, or at least it appears to be simpler and more basic. It's not something that was created by a human being, but something that's basic. You look at stone and it looks like solid, heavy material substance. And so science began by trying to analyze things like stone and other substances and break it into component parts to see what it's made out of. Because if you can understand what it's made out of, you can put it back together and have some control over it. But what they found in the late 19th and then continuing in the 20th century was that they found nothing but electric charges, nothing but electrical charges. They found, eventually they found neutrons, protons, electrons, and neutrons, which seemed to be neutral. They found that those were made of balanced electric charge. And then, of course, they went on finding more and more subatomic particles. But what had seemed so solid, like a rock, they found that the vast amount of it was just empty space. Vast amount was empty space with tiny, tiny little electric charges, tiny little electric wavicles, particles that operated within vast empty space in a vacuum. So this is not what it seems at all. So in modern science, from the late 19th century through the 20th century, the world was deconstructed into something that is extremely different from what we perceive. We perceive substance, we perceive matter as something solid, and we perceive electricity as something quite different. But they began to find the connection between matter and energy. And you get, of course, Einstein's equation from his first general theory of relativity in 1906, that E equals mc squared. The equivalence between energy and matter, that matter is just a state of energy. C squared, the speed of light squared, is only to make the units of matter and energy equivalent. It's like trying to make pounds or make meters and feet equivalent. You have to have some constant in order to make an equivalence between feet and meters. Both are measures of distance, but they're in different terms, and so you have to make the terms equivalent. So C squared actually is just making the terms between the measurement of mass and the measurement of energy equivalent. So actually the real equation is E equals m. Energy equals matter, matter equals energy. That's not what we experience. That's not Newtonian physics. Newtonian physics makes a distinction between matter and energy. Einstein erased the distinction, at least the fundamental distinction. Yes, on the macro scale, the scale that we perceive, it works quite well to see matter and energy as distinct, and energy working on matter. But that breaks down at the tiny and at the macro scale, the infinite scale and the infinitely small scale. So again, the world is not what we thought it was. The world is not what we thought it was. And science goes on deconstructing the common sense world. So you get theories, and they're still only theories, but they are theories of string theory and so forth. The idea of multiple universes, what's outside of this universe, questions that were never asked before. So again, it's far, far from the common sense world that we saw. And what science has not contradicted in everyday experience, that philosophy has contradicted. Certainly the Vedanta philosophy, Buddhist philosophy in a different way. I said I would come back to religion, let me come back for a moment to Buddhism. The Buddha made a departure from the Vedic philosophy, and an interesting departure. Myself, I think that the Vedic trajectory was truer to experience, and it explains experience more completely. There were certain contradictions in the Buddha's ideas which were a problem to Buddhists from the beginnings of Buddhism to the present day. And so you find Buddhism, schools of Buddhism constantly trying to find some way to recognize permanence. And then the insistence that no, Buddha said everything is temporary, so we have to get rid of that. And then again, the only way they could explain certain facts of experience was through some form of permanence. And again, the Orthodox Buddhists said, no, that's contrary to what the Buddha said, so we have to get rid of it. But the Buddha began, like modern science, the Buddha began, and he was a religious genius, he was a spiritual genius, a genius of thought, a genius of experience, of analysis of experience. He began by looking at the world. He had studied under various teachers, Jain and Hindu, or Vedic at that time. It was not yet known as Hinduism, but the Vedic tradition, teachers of the Vedic tradition and teachers of the Jaina tradition he had studied with. But he wasn't satisfied with the teachings that he had gotten. It seems that he had studied mainly with Sankhya teachers, not with Vedantic teachers, but with Sankhya teachers and with Jaina teachers. So he threw all of that away and said, what is it that I experience? And so he went back. He didn't go back by regression, hypnotic regression to the state of a baby, but he did go back and experience to what the baby sees. Not trying to understand it from the baby's perspective, but that's in effect what he did. He didn't express it in terms of the baby's perception. But he went back to just pure perception. Just the perception of sense data, pure sense data. And he worked from there. I think that the great weakness in the Buddha's thought, the Buddha was a great man, and so I'm a small person, and so I shouldn't criticize one great like the Buddha, but we can see with hindsight that the great flaw in the Buddha's thought was that he said everything is temporary, there is no individual self and no cosmic self, no infinite reality and no individual reality. But how is it that one knows that everything is changing without the idea of permanence? As Swami Vivekananda said, the idea of permanence and the idea of change rise and fall together. If one is true, the other has to be true. Both are matters of experience. And so the Vedanta says that you can only know that everything changes on the background of something that doesn't change. And that background is consciousness itself. Everything is perceived within consciousness. But again, the Buddha made a great discovery by going to perception itself, not taking the world for granted, not taking all of the stories about how the world came into being and who created it and how they created it, but what is this that I see? And so his discoveries were remarkable and great discoveries. The Vedanta did the same thing, just with a different emphasis, by starting with who am I? That will be another topic for talk. Who am I when I look at the individual? But Vedanta started with that, not with the world. But it looked at the world as well. So let me skip over a lot of development and say, what did the Vedanta find when it looked at the nature of experience? Well, no, let me not speak first in terms of Vedanta. Let me just first speak in terms of experience, and then we'll come to Vedanta. So as I said, science has deconstructed our experience and given us a world that is quite contrary to the world that we experience directly through the senses. And so philosophy further can deconstruct our experience. What is the nature of time? Newton, again, lived at a time. Newton was a great genius. Einstein, who destroyed the foundations of Newtonian physics, apologized to Newton and said, what a great, extraordinary genius you were. This is, of course, a paraphrase. Einstein said it very elegantly, very beautifully, and very simply. But he was talking about the flaws in Newtonian physics, Einstein was. And he said, stop. What a great genius. Stop meaning, let me stop my criticism of this great genius. What a tremendous genius he was. A great light in the firmament who made these fundamental discoveries which have led, it's on the shoulders of people like Newton that I stand and my discoveries stand. And so Newton was a great, extraordinary genius. So in criticizing his discoveries, we have to recognize that no, we're standing on the shoulders of geniuses like him. It was because of people like him that we can criticize their views now, because standing there we can see further than they could in their time. And so Newton saw time as an absolute. Time is a part of nature, one of the fundamental aspects of nature. There's a universal clock, not a mechanism, not really a clock, but time goes in an orderly fashion. Time is something which is real and which is fundamental in itself. Space, our experience of space. Space is fundamental. Space exists. Because space exists, we can populate it with things. People exist within space. But if you removed everything, space would still be there. It's just things would not be inside of space, but space would be there. Time. Time is an absolute. If nothing were happening at all, there were no activities, no motion, if everything were at a complete standstill and there were no change, time would still continue to tick away. You leave your house with your alarm clock in your room, you go to work, you come back, and the clock has still been ticking away. And so the universe is like that. Time is ticking away. Space is there, whether there are things in it or not. If the whole universe were to be destroyed, the space in which it exists would still be there, and the time which measures time would continue ticking. But no, time is only the measure of change. Time is only the measure of change. Einstein showed that time and space are relative to the perceiver's position within time and space. Einstein did not show that everything is relative. That's the usual simplistic understanding of what Einstein showed. Einstein showed that our perception of time and space is relative to our position within time and space, and our motion within time and space. But from a philosophical standpoint, we see that time is only the perception of change. If there's no change, there's no time. Time is the perception of change. Without change, there is no time. So time is not an absolute. That's why when a person goes into samadhi, a state of ultimate concentration of the mind, not even the highest samadhi where time and space absolutely disappear, everything disappears except for reality itself. But even what's called a low samadhi, which itself is a very high state, but it's called low compared to the highest samadhi. In any state of samadhi, change stops. And so in samadhi, one of the characteristics of samadhi is that the experience of time stops. A person who has gone into samadhi, they may come out of samadhi after our clock time of 2 hours, but the person in samadhi had no idea of how much time was there. There was just stillness, stillness. Space is the perception of the relative location of objects. That chair is so many feet away from me. That chair is many more feet away from me. I'm here, you are there. And so I get a sense of space. Many modern experiments, neuroscientific, physiological, etc., experiments of sense perception have shown that if you can remove all perceptions of objects and of distance, one way of doing that is to take a very finely made ping pong ball, cut it in half, and put the two halves over the eyes, so that the ping pong ball is a uniform white surface without shadow. You tape that over the eyes with light present in the room. What happens after some time is that the person loses all sense of space, the perception of space itself. At first, there's the sense that I know the ping pong ball, that these balls were taped over my eyes, and so I'm looking at that white, so it's a certain distance from my eye. And so that memory gives the sense of space, at least from my eye to that. And the body also has to be stilled, completely still also, so that you're not perceiving space through the tactile sense. But if the body is completely stilled in a sensory deprivation tank, and then these ping pong ball halves are put over the eyes, the sense of space itself, the sense of perception of space itself disappears. So it's possible to make space disappear. It's possible to make time disappear also. Time is more difficult. You have to go into samadhi. So ping pong ball halves won't work for that. You have to do a lot more to get out of time. But you can. So time and space are not realities in themselves. They are relative to perceptions of change and position of objects. So our whole idea of time and space is made relative. Matter, as I've explained in the talks before, no one has ever seen, touched, perceived in any fashion whatsoever matter. It's impossible to perceive matter. That sounds like a ridiculous, non-scientific statement. Every philosopher of science has to agree, because it's not a logically necessary conclusion, that no one has ever perceived matter. It's impossible to perceive matter. What you perceive are, through the eyes you see color, through the ears you perceive sound, through tactile sense you perceive pressure and temperature, through smell you perceive odor, through taste you perceive taste. Where is matter? Matter is a hypothesis to explain taste, smell, touch, pressure and temperature, color, sound, etc. Matter is a pure hypothesis. It works well. It works very well, as we can see in the manipulation of matter, what we call matter, through science. It works very well. But it's inescapable that matter itself is a hypothesis. And that it's a weak hypothesis is experiential also. For that also one has to go beyond just the ordinary perception. And again, it won't work just to put ping pong balls over your eyes and then you see that matter is a poor hypothesis, a weak hypothesis, and ultimately a false hypothesis. But it is possible. In fact, we do it every day, but it's not immediately obvious because this way of thinking is so different to our usual way of thinking. When we go into sleep, this world disappears. In dream, another world appears. In deep sleep, all worlds disappear. Everything disappears. If matter were ultimately true, how could you, anything in you, deny its existence? You say, well, Swami, we're not denying it, we just fell asleep. I just forgot about it. It's there, but I fell asleep. When I wake up, it's still there. And other people who are awake who saw me snoring on my bed knew that it was there. No, but you have denied it in your experience. You have denied it. And as one develops spiritually, one has to go far in the spiritual life, one begins to see that matter is just an appearance. Matter is nothing but an appearance. It's possible to withdraw into the mind where matter awake, but where matter disappears completely. Where one sees that all worlds, this world and all possible worlds, other realms of experience, are right here and right now. They just appear. Where do they appear? They appear within consciousness. One begins to see that matter itself is just an appearance within consciousness. As with Einstein and Newton, Einstein's physics contradicts Newtonian physics, but Newtonian physics works very well here at our level of experience. So Newtonian physics is still used. It's still used. It's still taught. It's still used. Engineers don't base their work, most engineers, on Einsteinian relativity. They base it on Newtonian physics, because at this level it works. But we know from Einstein's theories and the multiple proofs of those theories that ultimately Newtonian physics falls apart. And one can discover through one's direct experience that both Einsteinian and Newtonian physics dissolve, because all of this dissolves. All of this dissolves. This is an appearance within consciousness. It rests within consciousness. That's itself a big subject. I'll speak more about that when I come to the other topic of who am I? But let me say a little bit, let me go a little bit further and then come to the Vedantic view of the world. The question comes, is there a world separate from the perceiving self, the perceiver of the world? The obvious answer is, of course. Swami, you were born many years ago, yes, but you were born. And someday you're going to pass away. And that day is getting closer. So you came and you're going to go. And the world is still here. So some of you are older than I am. Not many, but a handful of you are older than I am. And so the world was here before I was born, and you know it was because you were there before I was born. So the world doesn't have anything to do with the perceiving self. Wrong. It has everything to do with the perceiving self. Is there a world outside of perception? The old philosophical question, crude question, and the intent of the question is good, but the question is crude. If a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, was there any sound? No, there wasn't any sound. You could say there is vibration, but where? If there's absolutely no perception, trees perceive. That Jagadish Chandra Bose, the great Indian scientist of the 19th and early 20th century, he showed that plants are also sentient. And Swami Vivekananda said that if he's given time, Bose will show that even the minerals, stones themselves, are sentient. And so some scientists have claimed to show that also. But absent perception, there is no world. Absent perception, there is no world. That's a strange thought. There are two ways of understanding that. The extreme way and the way that makes a place for common sense. The extreme way says that all I know is that this world appears within my consciousness. And when this world disappears from my consciousness, I have no right to say that anything exists, because consciousness alone exists. I see this world because it floats within my awareness. When my awareness leaves this world, then this world disappears. Another way of understanding that, which again is easier for people to grasp and which makes a place for our common sense perception of the world, is that this world is dreams within dreams. That there is a cosmic mind in which this whole universe has appeared. In Hindu mythology, post-Vedic mythology, based on Vedic ideas, but post-Vedic in the development of the story. There's the idea of Vishnu, the preserver, who in this myth is the Lord of the universe, the supreme deity, Vishnu. He's asleep on the cosmic waters, lying on the cosmic waters. And out of his navel grows a lotus. And then the lotus opens, and seated on the lotus is Brahma, the creator, what's called in Sanskrit and in Bengali and other Sanskritic languages, Chaturbukhi Brahma. Chaturbukhi Brahma. Brahma with four faces in the myth, the mythic story of Brahma, the creator. That means that the ultimate reality, Vishnu, asleep on the cosmic waters. The cosmic waters represent the ultimate reality, the formless reality of Brahman. And out of that formless reality, Vishnu, the God, the Supreme Lord, takes form, subtle form, but takes form, as it were, as a person who can respond to us, whether one believes in the Christian Trinity, or one believes in Jesus, or believes in the Buddha and the cosmic Buddhas, to whom one can pray and worship, and to whom one can go in the afterlife and so forth, or the Hindu gods and goddesses. The idea of God is that infinite impersonal reality beyond all conception takes on personality. And so Vishnu is one of the Hindu representations of that personality. But Vishnu in the Hindu conception is not the creator. Creation is a lower function. Out of Vishnu's navel comes the lotus, and out of the lotus comes Brahma, the creator. Brahma is a minor deity in the Hindu pantheon. And Brahma, how does Brahma create? In traditional Christianity, they say ex nihilo, that creation comes out of nothing in order to preserve the absolute nature of God. That if there's God and also material outside of God, and God turns that material into a world, then God is not really God, because God is limited by the external material. The Hindus had a different way of expressing it. That Brahma, everything has come out of that primordial ocean of consciousness, including God himself, the personality of God, to whom we pray and worship, to whom we bow down, in whom we seek refuge, from whom we seek protection and guidance. And out of that has come Brahma, the creator. And Brahma, who again has come out of Vishnu, how does he create? Out of his own mind. He thinks the universe into being. The universe is mind-born. This universe is mental. When I was 13, I was just beginning to awaken intellectually, like many kids around the age when suddenly we begin to think in a way that we hadn't before. Before that, we just reflected what was given to us. And so in elementary school, you're giving very concrete lessons and so forth. But then in junior high school, in the 8th grade, suddenly, like many people, I had a mental awakening. I began to think about things. I began to ask the question why about things. Not like little kids who just say why in order to bother their parents, because they realize that the more they ask why, the more frustrated mommy becomes. But a more mature why, really wanting to seek the why behind things. And so I read one of the books I read at that time. I got out of the junior high school bookstore. It was called The Universe and Dr. Einstein by Lincoln Barnett. It was a wonderful book, a popularization of Einstein's theories. And it was way beyond my age, my understanding at the time, but I read it diligently because everything in it I found fascinating. And one of the things I still remember from it, one of several things I still remember from it, and when I read it, I knew this is why I read the book. This was for me. And I know this is true. How it's true, I don't know, but I know this is true. It said that in the 20th century, physicists have begun to see the universe as more mental than physical. That the universe is a mental fact more than a physical fact. That the universe is mental more than physical. And when I read it, I knew that's true. This is why I picked up that book. It was to see this. I didn't know why it was true. I didn't know how it was true. But that was a marker. It was like a mile marker in my development. That I came across that and knew, yes, this is one of the pillars on which I will build, because I know it's true. Again, how I don't know, but I knew it. And now I know it more and can argue it philosophically. At the time, I couldn't have. So, is there a world separate from the perceiving self? Again, one answer is that all I know is that this universe appears within my consciousness. And if I can change the state of my consciousness, this universe, this body, everything goes with it. The other answer, which is much easier to deal with, and which is recommended for most people who want to pursue this line of thought, is that there is the Creator who thinks this universe into being, and then thought becomes concretized into matter. Matter is concretized thought. Just as matter is concretized energy, Swami Vivekananda said that eventually physics will discover that matter and energy are both subsumed in something higher, and that which is higher is mind. That matter and energy will be found to come from mind. And so, in this idea, there's the cosmic mind, Brahma. All of our minds are parts of that ocean of mind of Brahma. So Brahma dreams this whole universe into being, and we are dreamers within the dream of Brahma. As if I, as an individual, when I go to sleep, I dream, and in my dream there are other people that I see in the dream. Where are those other people from? They're my own dream creations. And yet, I meet somebody in the dream that I've created in my own mind. I meet somebody in the dream, talk to them. They say, well, come home and meet my grandmother. I go and meet their grandmother. That also is within my dream, made up in my own mind. And so Brahma dreams this world into being in all of its complexity. And we as individuals dream our dream within that dream. And so, in that idea, even if there's no perceiver of this universe as far as you and I go, there is Brahma the Creator who is perceiving the whole thing. And it exists because Brahma perceives it. And only because Brahma perceives it. It doesn't exist in itself. It exists because Brahma perceives it. So that means that if you, again, this is a difficult talk, I know. And it's following a line of thought which is different from what we're used to. So different that it's hard to believe it, hard to see it, hard to see how could anybody be crazy enough to believe it, and why would anybody be stupid enough to talk about it. All good legitimate questions. But you begin to see that there is no perception apart from consciousness. Consciousness is the light of perception itself. And apart from perception, there's nothing to perceive. There's not a perceived separate from consciousness. That which we perceive arises within consciousness. And so, is there a world separate from the perceiving self? No. If you expand the idea of perceiving self to the cosmic mind. So where is the world perceived? We perceive it within consciousness. As Brahma perceives the whole cosmos within consciousness, so we perceive our cosmos within our consciousness. Have you ever noticed how we only perceive a bubble? We only perceive a bubble. We assume that the world goes back behind what I can see, and the world goes much further than I can see, because I can go that way and get in the car and drive, and I see that new things come. But I'm still only perceiving a bubble. I can look through a microscope, and I'm still perceiving only a bubble. I can look through a telescope into the heavens. I'm still only perceiving a bubble. My whole universe is just this bubble of perception. Just this bubble of perception. That's all that I see. And so where is the world perceived? Within consciousness. So now let me come, in the last few minutes, let me say a word about the Vedantic view of the world. One of the words for world in Sanskrit, the language, original language of Vedanta, is loka. This is a loka. Loka also means, as those of you who know Sanskritic languages, like Bengali, Hindi, Gujarati, etc., Marathi, etc., loka also means people, can mean people. Lok Sabha in Indian the government. But loka basically means a world. Is there a world without a body? No. You perceive the world because you have a physical body appropriate to this world. If you change the nature of your perception, this world and this body will disappear, and you'll see another world with an appropriate body for perceiving that world. When we die, where do we go? We don't go somewhere. We don't go get on a train. We're not carried somewhere. This disappears, and the afterworld appears. A few months ago when I was with my mother when she was dying, it was fascinating. And it was fascinating to watch because she was beginning to lose contact with this world and beginning to see the other world. And so she would keep asking me, what does that sign say over there? And I went along with her. I could have said, oh, Mama, there's no sign over there. You're just imagining things. No, she was seeing a different reality. What does that sign say? I can't quite read it. And look at that boy over there. He's dressed so beautifully, such a beautiful little boy. But why are all of these thousands of people, they're all walking uphill? Thousands of people all walking uphill. Where are they going? Why are we all going uphill? And who is that beautiful boy in such beautiful clothes he's wearing? Such a simple, beautiful little boy walking uphill with us. And now we're passing over a river. What is that river? What is that river? And so many questions. She would ask me about the things that she was seeing. She was lying there with her eyes open. And yet she wasn't seeing this. She was beginning to see the other world, where masses of people were passing away and making their journey. But where was she seeing it? She hadn't gone somewhere else. She was lying there in the hospice room with me, lying in the same room I was lying in. I was lying in a recliner chair right next to her bed, talking to her. This would happen in the middle of the night especially. And so she was seeing that right here. This had disappeared, that had appeared. She knew I was still there, but I was with her in this journey. So when we die, we don't go somewhere. When we dream, we don't go somewhere. This disappears and something else takes its place. So loka is a realm of perception where we are embodied. To be in a loka means to be embodied, but in a body which is appropriate to this realm. These eyes, these ears, this nose, this tongue, this skin experiences the objects of this realm of existence. If I perceive a different realm of existence, then I'll perceive a different body. It may even look like this body, but it'll be a different body capable of perceiving that world. This world is also called samsara. Samsara. Yasamsarati, that which moves. Sasamsara, that is samsara. Samsara is that which is in constant motion, constant change. As Buddha said, kshanikam kshanikam, sarvam kshanikam. Everything is changing, everything is changing. Vedanta would say, yes, everything is changing, except for the consciousness which is perceiving the change. How do you know things are changing unless there's a viewpoint from stability which can perceive change? How can you see a movie without a screen? If you just project a movie out into space, you don't see the movie. You need a stationary screen which allows the changing scenes to find stability against which they are seen. And so samsara is this world where we come and go. But we come and go not in a real external world, but in a realm of perception. What gives it stability, according to the view that I gave of Brahma, the creator, is the perception of the cosmic mind. The perception of the cosmic mind. And again, the cosmic mind is an aspect of God. It's out of Vishnu. Vishnu, who comes from Brahman, that rests on the ocean of Brahman. Vishnu is the personality that arises in that ocean. And out of Vishnu comes Brahma. So Brahma is a subsidiary creation of God, the personality of God. And so the cosmic mind is also an aspect of the divine being. And it's in that that disappears. But it's only in that that it disappears. But in Brahma, because he's the cosmic mind, all possible worlds appear also. In Brahma, the other realms of existence, which are right here, the realm that my mother was seeing when she was passing away, the things that we see in dream, all of that are happening within the mind of Brahma. So that's samsara. This is also called bhavasagara. Bhavasagara, sagara, the ocean of bhava, of relative existence. This is the ocean of relative existence, where waves of individual selves are rising and then setting. We take birth when a wave of that ocean comes into this form. And then this form eventually disappears and goes back into the ocean of relative existence. So this is Bhavasagara. One other thing let me say before closing is and this I'll speak about more in the next lecture on who am I? Waking, dream, and deep sleep. In the waking state, we see this. In dream, we see the dream world. In deep sleep, both worlds disappear. It is possible to come to a quiet point in the mind where you see that this world and its perception arises within your own consciousness. The dream world arises within your own consciousness. But neither are real in themselves. Both are derivative. Both are secondary. Yes, Brahma gives stability so that people come and go and the world continues. But it's the same fact that we are perceiving. Brahma's perception is not different from our perception, except that Brahma contains the perceptions of everyone in the various realms of existence. That's the only difference. But the nature of Brahma's perception and the nature of our perception is the same. Waking, dream, and deep sleep. So let me say that in non-dualistic Vedanta, the aspect of Vedanta that most of us Swamis of the Ramakrishna Mission teach, there are exceptions, but most of us teach from that standpoint. There are three views of creation. The main view of creation, which is adhered to by people like Shankaracharya and the other major philosophers of Vedanta, is called Srishti Drishtivada. Srishti Drishtivada. You don't need to remember a tongue twister like that, but the Srishti means creation, Drishti means perception, and Vada means the doctrine of creation perception. That means the doctrine that because the world is there, I perceive it. So in most of his works, there are exceptions, but in most of his works, Shankaracharya doesn't question the world, the existence of the world. He takes the standpoint of the ordinary person because he's writing for the understanding of the ordinary person. That this world exists and therefore I see it. The world exists and therefore I see it. But there's what's considered a higher perception, and that is called Drishti Srishtivada, reverse of the two first terms. The world exists because I perceive it. The world exists because I perceive it. When there's no perception, there is no world. When there's no perception, there is no world. So the act of perception is creation itself. So considering my bubble of experience that I have, that is a projection of my own mind. A projection of my own mind, that I myself am creating it. There's the idea of Brahma, for those who find that too difficult, too impractical. The idea that, yes, it's Drishti Srishtivada, but it's the perception of Brahma creates the world. And as long as Brahma continues to perceive the world, it continues to exist. But it exists only as perception. It doesn't exist as reality. And then there's a third view, an extreme view, which very few people take for practice because it's very difficult to take for practice. Even if one believes it philosophically, it's very difficult to practice. And that is called Ajatavada, the doctrine of the unborn. And that says that there is no universe and never was a universe. There's nothing to explain. There's only Brahman. There's only reality, infinite reality. This doesn't need explanation because it doesn't exist. When you wake up from a dream, you don't think, oh gee, all of those friends that I had in my dream, where did they go? I've got to do some research on this. I got to find out where they went. We got to be good friends, and one of them owes me $5, and I'm going to get it back. No, when you wake up from the dream, okay, the dream is over. The dream is gone. I don't have to explain it. It was a state of mind. It was just mind born. And so the Ajatavada says that this is born in the mind. There's nothing that needs explaining. So let me finish by saying that in spiritual life, we have to take a standpoint that we can understand. So I've given a lot of high-flown ideas and so forth. But we have to find out what works for me. To take the standpoint that the universe doesn't exist, that's not going to work for 99.99999% even of spiritual aspirants, what to speak of ordinary people. Because you find that, well, I'm hungry, I got to go get something to eat, I need to go shopping, I need to do this, I need to do that, I got to call my friends, I got a job to go to and everything. And so this Ajatavada, that there is no universe, that's quickly disappeared. Even the idea that this universe is just in my own perception and nowhere else. That's very difficult to sustain. It's easier to sustain the idea that this universe is an appearance within the mind of Brahma. Of course, it's even easier for people just to take a common sense view of the universe, and that's what most people do. For instance, if you go to the Krishna consciousness, to ISKCON, the Bengal Vaishnava school, they don't question the reality of the universe. The universe exists. The universe is real. The universe exists as it is. And the different lokas, the different realms, those are other places that you go to. They have geographical identity, and you go there geographically. You go to a different geography to go to a different realm. So you're in this realm and you go to some other realm. And so it's all very physical, it's all very concrete, it's all very common sense. So if that's meaningful to you, yes, take that up. Take that up. That's what's meaningful to most people. But there is value in seeing this other viewpoint, that at least the viewpoint that this universe exists in the mind of Brahma, the cosmic mind, and all of our minds are like little whirlpools in this cosmic ocean of mind of Brahma. And that's why our minds are connected and why we can communicate and why we can share experience, because all our minds are connected to the mind of Brahma. Because if we can understand that, then this begins to lose its heaviness. One of the sources of our problems in life is that we take everything too seriously. Now, not to take things seriously, we have to do that in the right way. That doesn't mean in the wrong way that, I got my children and a wife or a husband, but why should I take that so seriously? This really isn't, I didn't really ask for all of this. I just kind of stumbled into it, so I'm going to go do what pleases me. So forget children, forget wife or husband or whatever. I'm just going to go do what pleases me. No, it doesn't mean taking things not seriously that way. No, a spiritual aspirant has to take things seriously in the right way and things non-seriously in the right way. So taking them non-seriously in the right way means not taking your own, again, forget about other people, not taking your own experiences of pleasure and pain so seriously, that my suffering is all important and the whole universe should stop because I'm suffering. Not taking my joys so seriously, that my happiness is so important. No, happiness and sorrow follow each other. Is there anyone here who has only had joy in their life, who's never tasted suffering? Is there anyone here who has had one whole day without any suffering of any kind? No, there's no one. And if you really look at your experience, you'll find you don't have any moment which doesn't have some suffering. Some joy, yes, Buddha said, dukkam dukkam, sarvam dukkam, everything is suffering. Vedanta doesn't say that, though we understand what the Buddha meant and don't disagree with what he meant, but we don't say such an extreme statement. No, life is joy and sorrow both, but you can't have one without the other. But if you know that the purpose of life is something else, then your joys and sorrows are taken with relativity. Taken with relativity. Yes, welcome joyful experiences, welcome, come all you like. Welcome sorrowful experiences, come when you come. You don't go looking for suffering, you don't ask for suffering, but suffering comes. You don't have to ask for it. It's going to come even if you try to avoid it. So wisdom lies in not trying to avoid because it's not going to work anyway. Not trying to grasp and not trying to avoid. Happiness is going to come to you. Sorrow is going to come to you. So just let it come and say that but reality lies somewhere else. God or self is something else, not this temporary joy and suffering. So let me bear with the experiences of life. So find a view of the world which allows you to spiritualize your perception of the world, whatever works for you. And time is up, and so I have to stop now. I'm already over time. There are various other things I could say about different viewpoints of the world, but let me just close by saying that find some way of looking at the world which spiritualizes the world and your experience of the world. And then you'll find that your life in the world helps you spiritually. It's not a distraction. It doesn't need to be a distraction. It's only a distraction, it's only a problem, it's only a burden to us in our spiritual lives because we haven't learned to see it properly. Learn to see the spirituality, to see the divinity inherent in all of our experience, so that then our life in the world, our interaction with the world, our work in the world, our joys and sorrows in the world will lead us higher. And so that we may attain to that is my prayer for today. So let me say a closing chant and then I'll give announcements. Om Dyo Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Apa Shanti Oshadhaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sama Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace is in the heavens, peace is in the sky, peace is on earth, peace is in the waters, peace in the plants and the trees. The gods are peace. Peace is the nature of truth. Peace. Peace alone, peace. May that peace, real peace, be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all the beings of the universe. So, for announcements,